The November water was cold enough to kill a man in minutes, but Marcus Thompson didn't think about that as he dove into the Miami River, watching a school bus disappear beneath the surface with two children still trapped inside. He thought about his own daughter, about the promises fathers make, about the split-second choices that define who we really are when everything else is stripped away. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know as he pulled those kids from the wreckage was that saving them would destroy everything he'd built, that their mother would enter his life like a beautiful lie, that friendship would become betrayal, trust would become manipulation, and love would become the most dangerous weapon of all. In small-town America, heroes aren't supposed to fall this hard. Single fathers working two jobs aren't supposed to tangle with billionaires, and children aren't supposed to pay the price for their parents' deceptions. But sometimes salvation comes with a cost nobody sees coming. Sometimes the people you save end up destroying you. The November frost painted intricate patterns across Marcus Thompson's windshield as he navigated the winding road toward Riverside Falls Community Hospital. At 42, the former Army sergeant had learned to measure his life in the narrow spaces between exhaustion, welding at Patterson's machine shop from 6 a.m. to 3 p.m., then racing home to check on his 12-year-old daughter Sophie before starting his security shift at the hospital from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The radio crackled with static as he passed the familiar landmarks of his adopted hometown. 3 years ago, Riverside Falls had been just another dot on the map when he and Sophie fled California, and his ex-wife Linda's ultimatum, get sober or lose your family. He'd chosen sobriety, but by then it was too late to save his marriage. Now, this small Ohio town beside the Miami River was home, the place where he'd rebuilt his life one careful decision at a time. Sophie's math homework sat completed in a folder on the passenger seat. Another evening ritual finished at their kitchen table where Marcus helped with long division while fighting to keep his eyes open. At 12, she was already too good at managing things herself, too aware of the weight her father carried. But she was thriving on her role, science club, a core group of friends who accepted their modest circumstances without question. Marcus checked the clock, 6:47 p.m. Sophie would be at Mrs. Chen's apartment until he finished his hospital shift, probably reading another astronomy book from the library while their elderly neighbor dozed in front of evening news. It was a routine that worked, providing structure and stability even when Marcus felt like he was perpetually one missed paycheck away from disaster. That's when he saw the school bus. The yellow vehicle was moving too fast for the icy conditions, its driver clearly struggling to maintain control as they approached the old steel bridge spanning the Miami River's narrowest point. Marcus slowed his pickup truck, his military training automatically cataloging the variables black ice stretching across the bridge approach. Guardrails that looked older than his daughter, a bus full of children whose faces he could see pressed against windows as the vehicle began to slide sideways. Time shifted into the hyper-aware clarity Marcus remembered from combat zones in Afghanistan. The bus driver yanked the wheel hard left, overcorrecting, and the heavy vehicle broke through the bridge's aging guardrail with a sound like thunder splitting the sky. For one impossible moment, the school bus hung suspended in the November air, its headlights illuminating the dark water 30 feet below. Then it plunged into the Miami River. Marcus was out of his truck and running before conscious thought took over. The bus had landed front first in 12 feet of water, its rear wheels still resting on the rocky shoreline, but the current was already pulling at the submerged front end. Through the emergency exit window at the back, he could see chaos, children screaming, water pouring through the broken windshield, the bus driver unconscious and slumped over the wheel. "Call 911, Marcus shouted to a motorist who had stopped on the bridge. Without waiting for a response, he kicked off his work boots and dove into the river. The shock of November water hit him like a physical assault, driving the air from his lungs and sending ice-cold needles through every nerve in his body. The current was stronger than he'd expected, fed by recent rains and early winter runoff from the surrounding hills. Marcus fought against the flow, his heavy work clothes dragging at him as he swam toward the sinking bus. The emergency exit was already partially submerged, and Marcus could see that most of the children had moved to the back of the bus, crowding together on seats that were still above water. A young teacher, probably in her first year, was doing her best to keep them calm while clearly fighting her own panic. I'm here to help, Marcus called out as he reached the window. How many kids? 38, the teacher gasped. Most can't swim. Marcus quickly assessed the situation. The bus was settling deeper with each passing second, but the angle meant the rear emergency exit would stay above water for maybe another 5 minutes. That was enough time to evacuate if they moved fast and stayed organized. Okay, listen to me, he said to the teacher, his voice carrying the authority he'd learned commanding soldiers in combat. We're going to get everyone out through this window. Biggest kids first, they can help pull the smaller ones to shore. You keep them calm and organized. I'll be right here to help each one through. The evacuation became a controlled chaos of small bodies and terrified cries. Marcus positioned himself in the water next to the window, lifting each child through the opening and either swimming them to shore himself or passing them to older students who could make the short swim safely. His hands were numb with cold, his muscles cramping from the effort, but he kept going. 37 children made it out. That's when he saw them twins, a boy and a girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old, huddled together in the front seat that was now completely underwater. They had somehow been missed in the evacuation, perhaps knocked unconscious when the bus first hit the water, perhaps just too scared to move when the chaos began. The bus gave a metallic groan and settled another foot deeper into the river. In 30 seconds, maybe less, the emergency exit would be underwater and those 2 children would be unreachable. Marcus didn't think. He took the deepest breath his cold shock lungs could manage and dove under the sinking bus. The interior was a nightmare of floating backpacks and overturned seats, the water murky with disturbed sediment from the river bottom. Marcus pulled himself along the submerged aisle, his lungs already burning from the effort and the cold. The twins were there, unconscious but breathing, their small bodies floating in the air pocket that remained at the very back of the front seat. He grabbed them both, one under each arm, and kicked off from the floor of the bus toward the emergency exit. The window opening looked impossibly small, impossibly far away, framed by the last few inches of airspace that remained in the bus. Marcus's vision was starting to tunnel from oxygen deprivation, but he forced himself to stay focused, to keep moving. The first twin, the little girl, went through the window and into the hands of paramedics who had finally arrived. The boy followed, coughing up river water, but alive. Marcus pulled himself through the opening just as the bus gave a final shudder and settled completely beneath the surface of the Miami River. On the shore, wrapped in emergency blankets and surrounded by paramedics. Marcus watched as the children were reunited with frantic parents who had been called to the scene. The twins were conscious now, the girl crying for her mother while the boy stared at Marcus with wide, solemn eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. "Thank you," the boy whispered as a paramedic checked his vital signs. "You saved us." Marcus knelt down to the child's level, his own emergency blanket draped around his shoulders like a cape. "What's your name?" "Buddy. Alexander," the boy said. "And this is my sister Isabella. Are you a superhero?" Despite everything, the cold, the exhaustion, the adrenaline crash that was making his hands shake, Marcus smiled. "No, I'm just a dad. A dad who couldn't let 2 kids get hurt if he could help it." "Where's our mom?" Isabella asked, her voice small and scared. "We want our mom." "She's coming," a paramedic assured them. "She's on her way." Marcus stood up, suddenly aware that he was shivering uncontrollably and that his own daughter would be worried if he didn't get home soon. Sophie was staying with Mrs. Chen until he returned from his hospital shift, but she always worried when he was late. "I need to go," he told the paramedic who was trying to convince him to go to the hospital for observation. "My daughter's expecting me." "Sir, you just pulled 2 children out of a freezing river. You should at least let us check you out." But Marcus was already walking toward his truck, leaving wet footprints in the frost-covered grass. He'd lived through roadside bombs and firefights in Afghanistan. He could handle a cold river in Ohio. What he couldn't handle was disappointing Sophie by missing their evening routine. Behind him, emergency vehicles continued to arrive, their red and blue lights painting the crash scene in urgent colors. Local news crews were setting up their cameras, and Marcus could hear reporters asking witnesses about the hero who had saved the children. He ducked his head and walked faster, uncomfortable with attention he didn't feel he deserved. He never saw the sleek black Tesla that pulled up to the scene just as he was driving away, or the woman who emerged from it with the desperate speed of a mother whose children had faced death. Victoria Sterling had been in a board meeting in downtown Columbus when her assistant burst in with news of the bus accident. The 40-minute drive to Riverside Falls had been the longest of her life, filled with images of Alexander and Isabella trapped underwater, of a phone call that would change everything forever. Now, seeing her children wrapped in blankets and very much alive, she felt her knees go weak with relief, so profound it was almost physical pain. "Mom!" Isabella ran to her, and Victoria swept both twins into an embrace that was fierce with maternal terror and love. She held them close, breathing in the scent of their hair and feeling their small hearts beating against her chest. "I was so scared," she whispered, "when they called and said there was an accident." "A man saved us," Alexander said, pulling back to look at his mother with serious eyes. "He went underwater and pulled us out when we couldn't move. The bus was sinking, and everyone thought we were going to die. But he saved us." Victoria looked around the scene, taking in the emergency vehicles and the crowd of parents reuniting with their children. "Where is he? I need to thank him." "He left," a paramedic explained. "Wouldn't give his name, wouldn't go to the hospital, just said he had to get home to his daughter." Victoria Sterling, who commanded boardrooms and managed billion-dollar acquisitions, who had built a technology empire from nothing and appeared on the cover of Forbes magazine as one of America's most powerful women, felt utterly helpless. Someone had saved her children's lives, and she didn't even know his name. 3 days after the bus accident, Victoria Sterling stood in the mahogany-paneled conference room on the 37th floor of Sterling Technologies' Columbus headquarters, watching her assistant Marcus Chen flip through a stack of newspaper clippings and printed articles about the rescue. "The local papers are calling him the Miami River hero," Marcus said, spreading the coverage across the polished table. "But none of them have his real name. The school district won't release information about the rescue because of privacy concerns, and the police report lists him only as Good Samaritan Witness." Victoria picked up the largest newspaper, the Riverside Falls Gazette, which featured a grainy photograph of a man walking away from the scene wrapped in an emergency blanket. The image was taken from behind and showed little more than a tall figure in work clothes, but something about his posture, the set of his shoulders, the determined stride spoke of quiet dignity and reluctance to seek attention. "What about the bus driver?" she asked. "Still in the hospital, but conscious. She remembers a man in a Patterson machine shop uniform jumping into the water before the emergency responders arrived." Victoria felt the first stirring of hope since beginning her search. Patterson Machine Shop was located in the industrial district of Riverside Falls, just 15 minutes from where the accident had occurred. If the hero worked there, it would be simple enough to find him and properly thank him for saving Alexander and Isabella's lives. An hour later, Victoria found herself walking through the front entrance of Patterson Machine Shop, a family-owned business that occupied a converted warehouse in Riverside Falls' revitalized industrial district. The air smelled of motor oil and hot metal, and the sound of welding equipment created a steady background rhythm of productivity and craftsmanship. "Help you?" asked a man in coveralls who appeared to be the shop's owner or manager. "I'm looking for the man who helped rescue children from the school bus accident 3 days ago," Victoria said. "I believe he works here." The man's expression immediately became guarded. "You a reporter?" "No, I'm—" Victoria hesitated, unsure how to explain her presence without revealing too much about her identity or her children's involvement. "I'm a parent, one of the families affected by the accident. I just want to thank him properly." The man studied her for a moment, taking in her expensive clothes and the confident bearing that marked her as someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. "Marcus Thompson," he said finally. "But he's not here right now. Works nights at the hospital. Sleeps during the day. Won't be back until tomorrow morning." "Marcus Thompson," Victoria repeated, committing the name to memory. "Can you tell me anything about him? Been working here 2 years since he moved to town." Good welder. Reliable. Minds his own business. Single dad, has a daughter about 12 years old. That's about all I know. The man paused and then added, Look, lady, Marcus is a private person. Whatever you're planning to do, don't make a big production out of it. He won't appreciate the attention. Victoria thanked him and left. But instead of returning to Columbus, she found herself driving through the residential neighborhoods of Riverside Falls, trying to understand the world that had produced a man who would risk his life for children he'd never met. The town was smaller than she'd expected, with tree-lined streets and modest homes that spoke of working-class families and multi-generational roots. She stopped at a coffee shop near the elementary school and found herself listening to conversations about the bus accident, about the guardian angel who had appeared just when all hope seemed lost. The story had clearly captured the imagination of the entire community, and Victoria began to understand that Marcus Thompson wasn't just a local hero. He was a symbol of the values that still mattered in small-town America. That evening, after putting Alexander and Isabella to bed in her lakefront mansion 40 miles away, Victoria made a decision that would have surprised anyone who knew her reputation for calculated business strategies and careful planning. She was going to find Marcus Thompson, but she wasn't going to approach him as Victoria Sterling, billionaire CEO. She was going to meet him as simply another parent, someone whose life had been touched by his courage, and see what kind of man had raised his own daughter while finding the strength to save other people's children. Marcus was replacing the alternator in a 2015 Honda Civic when he heard footsteps approaching his work bay at Patterson Machine Shop. It was 7:30 a.m., half an hour before the shop officially opened, but Pete Patterson had given him a key so he could work on side projects before his regular shift began. The extra income from small repair jobs helped bridge the gap between his two paychecks, though it meant even less sleep between his hospital shifts and his welding work. "Excuse me, are you Marcus Thompson?" He looked up from under the hood to see a woman standing in the doorway, backlit by the early morning sun streaming through the shop's windows. She was dressed casually in jeans and a wool sweater, but there was something about her posture and the way she held herself that suggested she was more accustomed to boardrooms than machine shops. "Depends who's asking," Marcus said, wiping his hands on a shop rag and studying her face. She was attractive in a way that spoke of good genetics and expensive skincare, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and intelligent eyes that seemed to be assessing him with the same careful attention he was giving her. "My name is Tori Sterling," she said, stepping into the work bay. "I wanted to thank you for what you did at the bridge 3 days ago." Marcus felt his stomach tighten with the familiar discomfort that came whenever someone brought up the bus rescue. He'd hoped the attention would die down quickly, that people would move on to other stories and leave him alone to return to his normal routine. "Look, Ms. Sterling, I appreciate you coming by, but what I did wasn't special. Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Tori said quietly. "They wouldn't have. I know this because my children were on that bus." The simple statement hit Marcus like a physical blow. He set down his tools and really looked at the woman standing in front of him, seeing past the composed exterior to the raw emotion she was trying to keep controlled. "Alexander and Isabella," he said, remembering the twins' names. "Are they okay? I mean, physically they seem fine, but sometimes trauma takes time to show up." "They're having nightmares," Tori admitted. "Isabella won't take baths anymore because she's afraid of the water. And Alexander keeps asking questions about what would have happened if you hadn't been there. But they're alive, Mr. Thompson. They're alive because you risked your own life to save them." Marcus nodded, understanding the complex emotions that followed any kind of traumatic event. He'd seen plenty of trauma during his military service, knew that the psychological wounds often took longer to heal than the physical ones. "Kids are resilient," he said. "Give them time and lots of love, and they'll work through it. Maybe talk to the school counselor about resources for families dealing with trauma." "You have children," Tori observed. It wasn't a question. "A daughter, Sophie. She's 12. Marcus glanced at the clock on the wall, calculating how much time he had before he needed to get home to make breakfast and see Sophie off to school. Look, Ms. Sterling, I'm glad your kids are okay, and I'm sorry they're having a rough time, but I really didn't do anything that deserves this kind of attention. Tori studied his face, seeing something that surprised her. Most people, when offered recognition for heroic actions, either embraced the praise or deflected it with false modesty. But Marcus Thompson seemed genuinely uncomfortable with being called a hero, as if the very idea was foreign to him. What if I told you there was a way you could help Alexander and Isabella deal with their trauma? She asked. Would you be interested? What kind of help? They keep talking about you, about the man who saved them. I think they need to see that you're real, that you're okay, that you're just a normal person living a normal life. Right now, you exist in their minds as this larger-than-life figure, and I think that's making it harder for them to process what happened. Marcus considered this. He'd learned during his own therapy for PTSD that sometimes the most helpful thing was simple human connection, the chance to talk through traumatic experiences with someone who understood what you'd been through. What did you have in mind? Maybe they could meet your daughter, Tori suggested. Something casual, normal. Let them see that heroes are just regular people who happen to be in the right place at the right time. The idea appealed to Marcus more than he expected. Sophie had been asking about the children from the bus accident, worried about whether they were okay and whether they had families to take care of them. She was naturally empathetic, the kind of kid who brought home stray cats and insisted on helping elderly neighbors with their groceries. Sophie would like that, he said. She's been worried about them. But I don't want this turning into some kind of media circus. No reporters, no cameras, no publicity. Absolutely not, Tori agreed quickly. Just two families getting together so the kids can meet each other. Maybe this weekend we could meet at the park by the elementary school. Marcus found himself nodding before he'd fully thought through the implications. There was something about Tori Sterling that suggested she understood the value of privacy and normal life. Despite the expensive clothes and the confident bearing that marked her as successful in whatever field she worked. Saturday afternoon works, he said. 2 o'clock at Riverside Park. Perfect, Tori smiled, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Marcus saw genuine warmth in her expression, rather than the careful control she'd been maintaining. And Mr. Thompson, thank you, not just for saving them, but for being willing to help them heal. After she left, Marcus returned to work on the Honda's alternator, but his mind kept drifting to the upcoming meeting. He found himself curious about Tori Sterling and her children, about what kind of life they lived and how they were coping with their shared trauma. She seemed like a good mother, the kind of person who put her children's needs ahead of her own comfort, and that was something Marcus respected deeply. What he didn't know was that Tori Sterling was actually Victoria Sterling, CEO of a technology empire worth $3 billion, and that her decision to hide her true identity was about to become the first in a series of complications that would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could imagine. Saturday afternoon brought the first truly warm day Riverside Falls had seen in weeks, with bright sunshine and temperatures that climbed into the mid-50s. Marcus arrived at the park 15 minutes early, partly out of military habit and partly because Sophie had been too excited to wait any longer at home. Are you sure they'll like me? Sophie asked for the third time as they spread a blanket on the grass near the playground equipment. She'd changed clothes twice that morning, finally settling on her favorite jeans and a sweater that brought out the green flecks in her dark eyes. They're going to love you, Marcus assured her, arranging the simple lunch they'd packed together. You're impossible not to like, kiddo. But what if they're still scared? What if seeing you reminds them of the accident? Marcus knelt down to Sophie's level, taking her small hands in his work-roughened ones. At 12, she was already showing signs of the thoughtful, empathetic person she was becoming, but sometimes her concern for others made her worry about things beyond her control. Then we'll deal with it, he said simply. Sometimes the best way to stop being afraid of something is to face it with people who care about you. A silver SUV pulled into the parking lot at exactly 2 o'clock, and Marcus watched as Tori Sterling emerged from the driver's seat. She was dressed even more casually than she'd been at the machine shop, in jeans and a simple t-shirt that made her look younger and more approachable. The twins who climbed out of the back seat looked healthy and alert, though Marcus could see a certain wariness in their posture that spoke of children who were still processing a traumatic experience. "Alexander, Isabella," Sophie called out, waving from the blanket. "Over here!" The twins approached cautiously, staying close to their mother's side as introductions were made. Alexander was serious and thoughtful, studying Marcus with the same intense attention he'd shown at the accident scene. Isabella was more outgoing, but Marcus noticed that she positioned herself so she could see both the playground equipment and the small creek that ran along the park's eastern border, clearly still uncomfortable around water. "I brought cookies," Sophie announced, holding out a container of chocolate chip cookies she'd baked the night before. "Dad helped, but I did most of the work myself." "They look delicious," Tori said, accepting a cookie and taking a bite that earned Sophie's immediate approval. "Did you use your grandmother's recipe?" "My great-grandmother's," Sophie corrected. "Dad says food tastes better when it's made with love and family stories." Marcus caught Tori's eye and saw something shift in her expression. Surprise, perhaps, at hearing philosophical concepts explained with such simple clarity by a 12-year-old. He wondered what kind of conversations she had with her own children, whether her work left time for the kind of daily discussions that happened naturally around kitchen tables and homework sessions. "Would you like to see the playground?" Sophie asked the twins. "I know all the best spots for climbing, and there's a really cool tunnel system under the big play structure." Isabella looked uncertain, but Alexander nodded with the careful politeness of a child who had been taught good manners. Sophie immediately appointed herself as tour guide, leading them toward the equipment while maintaining a steady stream of commentary about the various features and unwritten rules of playground politics. "She's remarkable," Tori said, watching the children with obvious appreciation. "So confident and kind. You've done an amazing job raising her." Marcus felt the familiar mixture of pride and self-doubt that came with compliments about Sophie. "She's had to grow up faster than I would have liked, but she's taught me as much as I've taught her." "What do you mean?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, watching Sophie patiently help Isabella navigate the rope ladder while Alexander observed from below. "When her mother left, I thought providing for Sophie meant having enough money, keeping her safe, making sure she had everything she needed. But Sophie taught me that what she needed most was just knowing that someone loved her completely, no matter what. Everything else was secondary." Tori followed his gaze to where the children were now engaged in an elaborate game that seemed to involve rescuing stuffed animals from imaginary disasters. "I'm still learning that lesson," she said quietly. "I've been so focused on providing everything Alexander and Isabella could possibly want that I forgot to pay attention to what they actually needed, which was their mother's attention, my presence instead of my presence." Tori's voice carried the weight of recognition that came with honest self-assessment. "When their father died, I threw myself into work because it was easier than facing the grief. I told myself I was building their future, securing their inheritance. But really I was just avoiding the pain of being present with my own loss." Marcus understood the impulse to escape into work, to find refuge in tasks that provided clear objectives and measurable outcomes. He'd done the same thing after his return from Afghanistan, burying himself in jobs and training programs rather than dealing with the psychological wounds that combat had left behind. "Alexander and Isabella seem like great kids," he said. "You must be doing something right." "They are great kids, but that's despite my parenting, not because of it. Watching you with Sophie, seeing how naturally you connect with her, it makes me realize how much I've been missing." The conversation was interrupted by Sophie's voice calling from the top of the climbing structure. "Look, we're all the way up here. This is the best spot to see everything." The three children had reached the highest platform of the playground equipment, their faces flushed with the excitement of shared adventure. Isabella was laughing the first genuine laughter Marcus had heard from her since the accident, while Alexander pointed out landmarks visible from their elevated position. "It's working," Tori said. and Marcus could hear the relief in her voice. They're starting to act like children again instead of trauma survivors. Kids are resilient, Marcus said. Give them a safe space and other kids to play with, and they remember how to be happy. The afternoon stretched on with the comfortable rhythm of children at play and adults learning to navigate the delicate process of building friendship. Marcus found himself genuinely enjoying Tori's company, discovering that beneath her professional competence lay a woman struggling with the same fundamental challenges that defined his own daily existence: how to be a good parent, how to help children heal from trauma, how to build a life that provided both security and happiness. As the sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting the playground in shades of gold and amber, the children reluctantly climbed down from their various adventures and returned to the blanket where Marcus and Tori had been sharing stories about their different experiences of single parenthood. "Do we have to go?" Isabella asked. Her earlier shyness completely evaporated in the face of new friendship. "Can Sophie come to our house sometime?" Alexander added, speaking directly to his mother for the first time since arriving at the park. Tori looked at Marcus with a question in her eyes, and he realized that the afternoon had accomplished something more than simple trauma recovery. It had opened the possibility of ongoing connection, of relationships that might grow beyond the circumstances of their first meeting. "If that's okay with Sophie's dad," Tori said carefully. "Can I, Dad?" Sophie asked, her face bright with the excitement of potential new adventures. "They said their house has a library with more books than the school library, and Isabella wants to show me her art supplies." Marcus found himself nodding despite his natural caution about accepting invitations that might highlight the differences in their economic circumstances. "I think that would be nice if you're sure it's not too much trouble." "It's no trouble at all," Tori said, and Marcus could hear genuine enthusiasm in her voice. "Maybe next weekend I could make lunch and the children could play in the garden." As they packed up the remains of their picnic and prepared to return to their separate lives, Marcus reflected on the unexpected turn his world had taken since diving into the Miami River a week ago. He'd saved 2 children from drowning, but somehow the act had rippled outward in ways he couldn't have predicted, creating connections and possibilities that felt both exciting and slightly overwhelming. The simple playground around them with its weathered equipment and patches of worn grass had provided the perfect backdrop for the beginning of something new. Like any friendship, this one would require ongoing attention and care, but the foundation had been laid with the kind of honest conversation and shared experience that made deeper relationships possible. Watching Sophie wave goodbye to Alexander and Isabella as their SUV disappeared down the street, Marcus realized that his life had just become more complicated in ways that might ultimately make it richer, more connected, more full of the kind of love that couldn't be purchased but had to be earned through patience, understanding, and the willingness to see past surface differences to the fundamental human needs that connected all parents regardless of their circumstances. What he didn't know was that Tori Sterling was actually Victoria Sterling, one of the wealthiest women in America, and that her decision to hide her true identity was about to become significantly more complicated as their friendship deepened and the boundaries between truth and deception began to blur in ways that would test both of their commitments to honesty and trust. Over the following 3 weeks, the friendship between the Thompson and Sterling families became a natural part of their weekly rhythm. Victoria found herself looking forward to these visits with an anticipation that surprised her, not just because Alexander and Isabella were clearly benefiting from their friendship with Sophie, but because her conversations with Marcus had become the most genuine human connection she'd experienced in years. On a crisp November afternoon, Victoria stood in her walk-in closet, staring at a wardrobe that suddenly felt completely inadequate for the casual dinner Marcus had invited her to share at their apartment. Every piece of clothing she owned screamed expensive in a way that would be impossible to explain as the income of a marketing professional, which was how she described her work to Marcus when he'd asked about her career. Mrs. Sterling, her housekeeper, Maria, appeared in the doorway. "You seem troubled about something." "I need clothes that look normal," Victoria said, gesturing helplessly at the rows of designer suits and luxury casual wear. "Middle-class normal," Single working mother normal. Maria raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. At 62, she had learned that wealthy people often had complicated reasons for their requests. My daughter Rosa is about your size. She works at the bank downtown. I could bring some of her clothes. That would be perfect, Victoria said gratefully. An hour later, dressed in borrowed clothes and driving a rented Honda Civic instead of her usual Tesla, Victoria arrived at Marcus and Sophie's apartment complex. The building was well maintained but clearly older, with the kind of practical modifications that spoke of working-class families making the most of affordable housing. Sophie answered the door wearing an apron that was too big for her, her face flushed with excitement about the dinner she'd helped prepare. Tori, you're just in time. Dad's making his famous chili, and I made cornbread from scratch. The apartment was small but warm, filled with the kind of personal touches that made a house feel like home, despite limited space. Family photographs lined every available surface. Sophie's school pictures from each year. Snapshots of father-daughter adventures. A formal portrait taken at Marcus's workplace Christmas party, where both of them wore their best clothes and beamed with genuine happiness. This smells incredible, Victoria said, accepting a bowl of chili that was clearly a family recipe perfected through years of refinement. Sophie, did you really make this cornbread yourself? Dad taught me, Sophie said proudly. He says cooking is a life skill everyone needs to learn, and that food made with your own hands always tastes better than anything you can buy. As they ate dinner around the small kitchen table, Victoria found herself studying the easy dynamic between Marcus and Sophie. They shared household responsibilities naturally, discussed Sophie's school day with genuine interest, and moved through their evening routine with the comfortable efficiency of two people who had learned to depend on each other completely. How was your science project presentation today? Marcus asked Sophie as they cleared the dinner dishes. Really good, Mrs. Rodriguez said my renewable energy model was the most innovative she'd seen in 15 years of teaching. And guess what? Sophie's eyes lit up with excitement. She thinks I should enter it in the district science fair next month. Sophie, that's fantastic, Victoria said, meaning it genuinely. The district fair is a big deal. Only the best projects from each school get selected. Have you thought about what you might want to study in college? Marcus asked, and Victoria noticed how naturally he assumed higher education was in Sophie's future, despite their financial limitations. Maybe engineering, Sophie said thoughtfully, or environmental science. I want to work on problems that could help people and the planet at the same time. Victoria felt a complex mixture of emotions as she listened to Sophie's ambitious plans. At 12, she was already demonstrating the kind of innovative thinking and social consciousness that Victoria tried to cultivate in her company's research teams. But she was doing it without access to the resources and opportunities that Victoria took for granted. After dinner, Sophie excused herself to work on homework, leaving Marcus and Victoria alone in the small living room with coffee and the kind of comfortable conversation that had become the foundation of their friendship. Can I ask you something personal? Victoria said, gathering courage to probe into the subject Marcus had mentioned briefly during their first meeting. Shoot. Sophie's mother, Linda, what really happened? You mentioned a rough patch, but I get the sense there's more to the story. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it contained answers to questions he'd been avoiding. I was drinking too much, he said finally. A lot too much. Started after I got back from Afghanistan, got worse when the PTSD kicked in, and I couldn't hold down a steady job. I thought I was managing it, thought I was functioning fine, but I wasn't. Victoria felt her breath catch at the honesty of his admission. Most people, when discussing failed relationships, offered carefully edited versions that protected their own image. But Marcus was sharing the kind of painful truth that required both courage and trust. Linda found me passed out in Sophie's bedroom one night when I was supposed to be watching her. Marcus continued, his voice carrying the sharp edge of shame that had motivated his commitment to sobriety. Sophie was 4 years old enough to understand that Daddy was sick, but too young to comprehend why he kept making promises he couldn't keep. But you got help, Victoria said quietly. Eventually, it took losing everything that mattered to make me realize I needed to change. I went to rehab, got sober, fought for joint custody, but the damage was done. Linda had moved on with her life, remarried a guy who could provide stability and security, all the things I couldn't offer during those years. Does Sophie see her mother twice a year, supervised visits? Linda lives in California now, has a new family. She sends birthday cards and Christmas presents, but she's not really part of Sophie's daily life anymore. Marcus looked up from his coffee, meeting Victoria's eyes. I used to be angry about that, but I've come to understand that Linda made the best decision she could with the information she had at the time. The conversation was interrupted by Sophie's return to the living room, carrying her math homework and looking slightly frustrated. "Dad, can you help me with this problem?" she asked, spreading her worksheets on the coffee table. "I understand the formula, but I can't figure out how to apply it to this word problem." Marcus immediately shifted into teacher mode, patiently working through the mathematical concepts while Sophie took notes and asked clarifying questions. Victoria watched their interaction with growing appreciation for the daily commitment that good parenting required, not just the dramatic moments of crisis or celebration, but the steady presence that helped children navigate ordinary challenges with confidence. "Thanks, Dad," Sophie said when they'd solved the problem together. "You always make it make sense." After Sophie returned to her room to finish her homework, Victoria found herself thinking about the profound differences between their approaches to parenting. Marcus seemed to view every interaction as an opportunity for teaching and connection, while she treated most of Alexander and Isabella's needs as items to be scheduled and managed. "You're a really good father," she said simply. "I try to be. Sophie deserves that she deserves someone who's completely present and committed to her happiness and growth. It shows. She's confident and kind and curious about everything. Those qualities don't happen by accident." Marcus looked uncomfortable with the praise, as he always did when their conversations turned to his parenting abilities. "I made a lot of mistakes early on. I'm just trying to do better now than I did then." As the evening wound down and Victoria prepared to leave, she realized that their friendship had evolved beyond simple gratitude or mutual support for their children's trauma recovery. She genuinely looked forward to these conversations with Marcus, valued his perspective on parenting and life, and had come to see him as someone whose friendship enriched her own understanding of what mattered most. The lie about her identity was becoming more difficult to maintain, not because of practical complications, but because it felt like a betrayal of the trust that Marcus had shown by sharing his own painful truths. He'd been honest about his struggles with addiction, his failed marriage, his financial limitations, and his daily efforts to be a better father than he'd been in the past. In return, she was lying about everything from her name to her profession to her basic circumstances. But as she drove home to her lakefront mansion, Victoria couldn't bring herself to imagine telling Marcus the truth. Their friendship felt too precious, too genuine, too much like the normal human connection she'd been seeking since Alexander and Isabella's rescue. The thought of losing that connection by revealing her deception felt like risking something more valuable than any business deal or corporate achievement. What she didn't realize was that the longer she maintained her lie, the more painful the eventual truth would become, and that her deception was about to collide with her professional responsibilities in ways that would make continuing her double life impossible. The Sterling Technologies helicopter lifted off from the Columbus headquarters at 9:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, carrying Victoria toward a site visit that would change everything. For weeks, she'd been successfully maintaining her double-life billionaire CEO by day, middle-class marketing professional Tori Sterling during her visits to Riverside Falls. But corporate decisions had a way of creating consequences that personal choices couldn't avoid. The Riverside Falls municipal contract is our flagship smart city implementation, her CFO, Michael Rodriguez, was explaining as they flew over the Ohio countryside. Complete digital infrastructure overhaul, new traffic management systems, municipal Wi-Fi, upgraded emergency services communication. If this pilot program succeeds, We'll scale it across 17 states. Victoria nodded, but her mind was focused on the uncomfortable irony of the situation. Sterling Technologies wasn't just doing business in Riverside Falls, they were transforming the entire town, bringing her corporate identity into direct contact with the community where she'd been masquerading as a working-class single mother. Local implementation is being handled by Patterson Industries, Rodriguez continued. Family-owned machine shop, excellent reputation for precision work. They've been fabricating all our custom mounting hardware. Victoria felt her stomach drop. Patterson Industries, the same company where Marcus Thompson worked as a welder, where he would inevitably encounter Sterling Technologies corporate materials that featured her photograph and biographical information. I want to tour the Patterson facility personally, Victoria said, making a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. Schedule a meeting with their management team. 45 minutes later, the Sterling Technologies convoy, 3 black SUVs carrying executives and technical staff, pulled up to Patterson Industries. Victoria emerged from the lead vehicle wearing her full corporate armor designer suit, executive demeanor, and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding attention and respect. Pete Patterson met them at the entrance, wearing coveralls and the kind of straightforward professionalism that characterized successful small business owners. Miss Sterling, welcome to Patterson Industries. Your technical team has been great to work with. Thank you, Mr. Patterson. I'm eager to see the quality of work that's made this partnership so successful. The tour of the facility took them through workshop areas that Victoria recognized from her previous visit as Tori Sterling, when she'd come looking for Marcus Thompson after the bus rescue. But now she was seeing it through different eyes, evaluating the business partnership rather than seeking personal connections. This is our precision welding station, Pete was explaining to the group. We've been fabricating custom mounting brackets for your traffic management systems. High-grade steel, weather-resistant coating, built to last decades. Victoria followed the group, her attention focused on Pete's technical explanations, while her peripheral vision scanned the workstations for any sign of Marcus. She wasn't sure whether she hoped to see him or hoped to avoid him, but the possibility of their two worlds colliding in this public setting made her increasingly nervous. Marcus, Pete called out across the shop floor. Come show these folks the bracket assembly you finished yesterday. Victoria's heart stopped as she watched Marcus Thompson walking toward their group, wearing safety glasses and work clothes, carrying a piece of fabricated steel that gleamed with expert craftsmanship. For a moment, neither of them moved. Marcus stopped in his tracks when he saw Victoria, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to confusion to something that might have been recognition. Marcus Thompson, Pete was saying, oblivious to the tension suddenly filling the air. One of our best welders, Marcus, this is Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Technologies. Marcus stepped forward with mechanical politeness, extending his hand while his mind clearly raced to process what he was seeing. Ms. Sterling, he said carefully. Pleasure to meet you. Victoria accepted his handshake, feeling the calloused strength of fingers she'd held during dinner at his apartment, during conversations about parenting and friendship, and the genuine connection they'd built over the past month. Mr. Thompson, she managed to say, her voice sounding strangely formal even to herself. Marcus has been with us for 2 years, Pete continued, still unaware of the personal drama unfolding in front of him. Reliable, skilled, good with custom work, the kind of employee every business owner hopes to find? I can see that, Victoria said, accepting the steel bracket Marcus handed her and noting the quality of workmanship that spoke of pride and professional craft. This is excellent work. Marcus studied her face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces didn't quite fit together. Have we met before? Ms. Sterling, you look familiar. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that could expose Victoria's months of deception in front of her entire executive team. She could see Marcus's confusion deepening as he tried to reconcile the woman he knew as Tori Sterling with the billionaire CEO standing in his workplace. I don't believe so, Victoria said, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. Perhaps you've seen me in business publications. It was a plausible explanation that allowed both of them to maintain professional composure, but Victoria could see that Marcus wasn't satisfied with her response. His expression showed the kind of analytical thinking that had made him a good soldier and skilled craftsman, and she realized he was putting together pieces of a puzzle that would eventually lead him to the truth. The tour continued for another 20 minutes, but Victoria found herself unable to concentrate on technical specifications or installation schedules. Every few minutes, she caught Marcus glancing in her direction with the persistent attention of someone who had recognized something important but couldn't quite place what it meant. As the Sterling Technologies convoy prepared to leave Patterson Industries, Victoria made a decision that surprised her with its spontaneity. She approached Pete Patterson with a request that had nothing to do with corporate business. Mr. Patterson, I have an unusual request. I'd like to speak privately with Marcus Thompson for a few minutes. Personal matter. Pete looked surprised but gestured toward his office. Sure thing. Marcus Mez. Sterling would like a word with you. In the privacy of Pete's office, with her executive team waiting outside and the afternoon shadows lengthening across Riverside Falls, Victoria faced the moment she'd been dreading since she'd first decided to hide her identity. You're Tori Sterling, Marcus said quietly, his statement carrying the weight of someone who had finally solved a puzzle that had been bothering him for hours. Yes, Victoria said simply. And I'm Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Technologies. I'm the same person. Marcus, I've been lying to you about who I am. Marcus sat down heavily in Pete's desk chair, running his hands through his hair with the exhausted gesture of someone whose world had just shifted in ways he couldn't yet fully comprehend. Jesus, Victoria, or Tori, or whoever you are. He looked up at her with an expression that mixed hurt and bewilderment. Why would you lie about something like that? Victoria took a deep breath, knowing that her answer would determine whether their friendship could survive her deception. Because I wanted to know who you really were, not how you would treat a billionaire, but how you would treat another parent. I want a genuine friendship without the complications of wealth and status. So everything our friendship, the kids getting together, Sophie's attachment to you, all of it was based on a lie. The friendship was real, Victoria said urgently. The conversations we had, the way you helped me understand what it means to be a good parent, none of that was fake. Only my name and job were lies. Everything else was true. Marcus stared at her for a long moment, processing the implications of her confession. Victoria, you've been pretending to be someone you're not for months. You let Sophie get attached to you, let her trust you. Do you have any idea what this is going to do to her? The question hit Victoria harder than any corporate criticism she'd ever received. She'd been so focused on her own motivations for the deception that she hadn't fully considered how the revelation would affect Sophie, who had welcomed her into their family with the open heart of a child who believed friendship was based on honesty and mutual care. I never meant to hurt her, Victoria said quietly. Or you. You're talking about our friendship like it was some kind of social experiment, Marcus said, walking to the window. How am I supposed to trust anything you've told me? Because you know me, Victoria said desperately. You know who I am when I'm with you and Sophie. The name on my business cards doesn't change that, doesn't it? The woman I thought I knew understood working 2 jobs and worrying about rent. You don't understand those struggles? Victoria, I understand what it's like to worry about being a good parent. That's not the same thing, Marcus interrupted firmly. When Sophie needed new school shoes last month, I had to choose between buying them and fixing my truck's transmission. That's not a choice you've ever had to make. Victoria felt the weight of that truth. Despite all her good intentions, despite the genuine friendship they'd built, there remained a fundamental gap between their lived experiences that her deception had only widened. I have to get back, she said finally, hearing her assistant's voice outside the office, reminding her of the board meeting scheduled for that afternoon. But Marcus, this conversation isn't over. Our friendship, whatever it is now, it matters to me. I need time to think, Marcus said, not looking at her. to figure out how to explain this to Sophie. Will you tell her? I don't know, but I won't lie to her the way you lied to me. Victoria left Patterson Industries feeling like she'd lost something precious that she might never recover. The helicopter ride back to Columbus passed in a blur of corporate small talk and strategic planning, but her mind was focused entirely on the conversation with Marcus and the growing certainty that her deception had damaged something that had been more valuable than any business relationship. That evening, as she tucked Alexander and Isabella into bed, both children asked about their next visit with Sophie. Victoria found herself making promises she wasn't sure she could keep, committed to a friendship that might no longer exist by the time she had to honor them. The price of her deception was becoming clear, and it was higher than she'd ever imagined. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table helping Sophie with her science project, while trying to process the revelation that had turned his understanding of the past month completely upside down. Sophie was working on improvements to her renewable energy model, chattering excitedly about the district science fair and the possibility of winning a scholarship to attend a summer STEM camp. Dad, you're not listening, Sophie said, looking up from her calculations with the perceptive attention that had always made her seem older than her years. Sorry, kiddo. Just distracted by work stuff. Tell me about the battery storage system again. Sophie launched into a detailed explanation of how she'd figured out how to store the electricity generated by her wind turbines. But Marcus found his mind drifting to the conversation with Victoria in Pete's office. The woman he'd known as Tori Sterling, marketing professional, single mother struggling with grief and parenting challenges, was actually one of the wealthiest people in America. Someone whose life existed in a sphere so far removed from his own that their friendship should have been impossible. His phone rang at 8:30, interrupting Sophie's presentation about energy efficiency calculations. The caller ID showed a number he recognized as Victoria calling from her real phone, not the number she'd given him as Tori. Dad, who is it? Sophie asked, noting his hesitation. Someone from work, Marcus said, which was technically true. I need to take this. Keep working on your project. He stepped into the small hallway outside their apartment to take the call. Marcus, it's Victoria. Her voice carried the same mixture of uncertainty and determination he remembered from their afternoon confrontation. I know you need time to process everything, but I couldn't leave things the way we did. I need you to understand why I made the choices I made. I'm listening, Marcus said, though his tone remained guarded. When Alexander and Isabella were rescued from that bus, I realized I didn't know how to be the kind of mother they needed, Victoria began. I'd spent 3 years since their father died building walls around myself, using work as an excuse to avoid the emotional complexity of real parenting. Watching you with Sophie that first day at the playground, I saw something I'd never learned how to be completely present with a child. That still doesn't justify lying to me for a month. You're right, it doesn't. But Marcus, getting to know you and Sophie has been the most real thing in my life in years. When I was with you, I stopped performing and started being honest about what I wanted from life, about what kind of person I wanted to be. Marcus leaned against the hallway wall, recognizing the sincerity in Victoria's voice while still struggling with the magnitude of her deception. Victoria, do you understand what it's like to worry about money? Really worry, not just manage a budget, but actually fear you won't be able to provide for your child. No, Victoria admitted. I don't. I've never had to make the kind of choices you make every day, but I do understand what it's like to feel like you're failing as a parent, to worry that you're not giving your children what they need to become good people. It's not the same thing. No, it's not. But it's something we have in common, something real we could build on if you're willing to try. Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking about the past month of friendship, about Sophie's growing attachment to Victoria and the twins, about the way their lives had become intertwined in ways that felt important and meaningful. What do you want from me, Victoria? I want the chance to be honest with you from now on. No more lies, no more deception. I want to see if our friendship can survive the truth about who I really am. And Sophie, how do I explain to her that the woman she's come to trust has been lying about her identity? We tell her the truth, Victoria said simply. We explain that sometimes adults make mistakes, even when their intentions are good. We show her that friendship is strong enough to survive honesty, even when that honesty is complicated. Marcus found himself thinking about Sophie's science fair project, about her dreams of attending college and pursuing a career in environmental engineering. Victoria's wealth could provide opportunities that Marcus would never be able to offer. But accepting that help would fundamentally change the dynamic of their relationship in ways that might damage the very things that made their friendship valuable. I need to think about this, he said finally, and I need to talk to Sophie. She deserves to know the truth before I make any decisions about our friendship. Of course, take all the time you need. But Marcus, thank you for listening, and thank you for everything you've taught me about what it means to be a good parent. After hanging up, Marcus returned to the kitchen table where Sophie was putting the finishing touches on her project display. She looked up as he sat down, clearly sensing that something important had happened during his phone call. Everything okay, Dad? Marcus considered how to begin a conversation that would change Sophie's understanding of their new friendship, while potentially affecting her happiness in ways he couldn't predict. Sophie, what would you say if I told you that Tori Sterling isn't exactly who she appears to be? Sophie set down her pen and gave him her full attention. What do you mean her real name is Victoria Sterling, and she's actually the CEO of a very successful technology company? She's extremely wealthy, the kind of person who owns big houses and expensive cars, and has more money than she could spend in several lifetimes. Sophie processed this information with the analytical thinking she applied to complex problems. So she lied to us about who she was. She did. Why would she do that? Marcus chose his words carefully, wanting to be honest about Victoria's deception while also helping Sophie understand the complexity of adult motivations and relationships. She wanted to be our friend without all the complications that come with being wealthy. She was afraid that if we knew who she really was, we might treat her differently or want to be friends with her for the wrong reasons. Sophie considered this explanation with serious attention. Do you think she was right to lie? No, I don't. Friends should be honest with each other, even when the truth is complicated. But do you think she's still our friend, now that we know the truth? The question went straight to the heart of Marcus's own uncertainty. I don't know, kiddo. What do you think? Sophie was quiet for several minutes, clearly working through the implications of Victoria's deception and its impact on their friendship. I think she's still our friend, she said finally. I think she made a mistake by lying, but I don't think that changes how she feels about us or how we feel about her. When we're together, she's not acting like a rich person or a CEO. She's just acting like someone who likes spending time with us. Marcus felt a surge of pride at his daughter's wisdom and emotional maturity. At 12, she was already demonstrating the kind of sophisticated thinking about relationships and human nature that many adults never developed. You might be right, he said. But if we decide to continue being friends with Victoria, things will be different. We'll know she has resources we don't have, opportunities she could offer that we could never provide for ourselves. That might make our friendship more complicated. Maybe, Sophie said thoughtfully. But it might also make it more interesting. And Dad, yeah, I like Alexander and Isabella. They're good kids, and they need friends just as much as we do. I don't think we should stop being friends with them just because their mom has a lot of money. Marcus realized that Sophie had cut through all the adult complications to identify what really mattered, the genuine connections they'd built with people they cared about, regardless of the circumstances that had brought them together. Okay, he said, making a decision that felt both scary and right. We'll give it a try, but complete honesty from now on, no matter how complicated the truth might be. Even when it's complicated, Sophie agreed, unconsciously echoing words that would become their family motto in the months ahead. As Marcus helped Sophie pack up her science fair materials and prepare for bed, he realized that their friendship with Victoria Sterling was about to enter uncharted territory. The easy dynamic they'd established over the past month had been built on a foundation that was partially false, And rebuilding that foundation with complete honesty would require patience, understanding, and a willingness to navigate differences that went far beyond simple economic circumstances. But watching Sophie's mature response to Victoria's deception, Marcus felt hopeful that their friendship might emerge stronger rather than weaker from the challenge of complete transparency. Sophie was right. Victoria's wealth didn't change the fundamental connection they'd built, and the values that had drawn them together in the first place were strong enough to survive the complications that honesty might bring. The real test would come in the days and weeks ahead, as they learned to be friends across the vast economic and social differences that Victoria's deception had temporarily obscured. But for the first time since that afternoon's revelation, Marcus felt optimistic that the friendship was worth fighting for, whatever challenges lay ahead. Linda Morrison had been monitoring the situation for 6 weeks before she decided to act. The private investigator's report lay spread across the dining room table of her Malibu beach house, a comprehensive document filled with photographs, financial records, and detailed surveillance notes that painted a picture of her ex-husband's life that she found both fascinating and deeply concerning. The centerpiece of the investigation was a photograph taken at a charity gala in Columbus. Marcus Thompson, in an ill-fitting rental tuxedo, standing beside Victoria Sterling in a designer gown that probably cost more than he made in 3 months. The caption in the society pages described them as an unlikely friendship that bridges economic boundaries and praised their inspiring example of community connection across social classes. Linda stared at the image, recognizing something in Marcus's expression that she hadn't seen during their marriage's genuine happiness. The kind of contentment that came from feeling valued and appreciated. It was a look that reminded her of why she'd fallen in love with him 15 years ago, before his drinking and their financial struggles had eroded everything good between them. "Tom, come look at this," she called to her current husband, who was reading legal briefs in the adjoining sunroom of their beachfront home. Tom Morrison was a successful entertainment lawyer whose clients included A-list actors and major production companies. Their marriage provided Linda with the financial security and social status she'd always wanted, built around shared goals and practical compatibility rather than the passionate but unstable connection she'd had with Marcus. "What is it?" Tom asked, settling beside her and adjusting his reading glasses to examine the investigator's materials. "My ex-husband," Linda said, pointing to the photograph. "Apparently he's become best friends with one of the wealthiest women in America." Tom studied the image and accompanying documents with the analytical attention he brought to high-stakes legal cases. Victoria Sterling, Sterling Technologies, net worth estimated at $3 billion. This is quite a development. Marcus always had a talent for landing on his feet, Linda said, though her tone suggested she didn't consider this entirely positive. Even when he was drinking himself into oblivion, he could somehow charm his way into situations that most people would never access. The investigator's report detailed the friendship that had developed between the Thompson and Sterling families over the past 2 months, regular visits, shared meals, children's activities that brought together Marcus's daughter Sophie with Victoria's twins. The documentation included photographs of family outings, financial records showing unexplained improvements in Marcus's circumstances, and expert testimony about the psychological impact of exposing children to extreme wealth disparities. "What are you thinking?" Tom asked, recognizing the calculating expression that meant his wife was developing a strategic plan. "I'm thinking that Sophie is 12 years old and shouldn't be exposed to the complexities of adult relationships that she can't understand or navigate safely," Linda said, opening her laptop to search for family law attorneys in Ohio. "I'm thinking that Marcus's judgment about appropriate relationships has always been questionable, and this situation proves that nothing has changed." Tom understood the implications immediately. "You're talking about reopening custody proceedings." "I'm talking about protecting my daughter from a father whose priorities have clearly shifted away from her best interests," Linda corrected. "This Sterling woman has children of her own, billions of dollars in business obligations, and a public profile that has nothing to do with Sophie's welfare. What happens when Marcus decides that his new lifestyle is more important than his responsibilities as a father?" The legal strategy was already forming in Linda's mind, built around arguments about stability, appropriate social environments, and the potential dangers of exposing a child to wealth and circumstances beyond her emotional maturity. She'd used similar arguments during their original custody proceedings, though at that time Marcus's alcoholism had provided more obvious evidence of unfitness as a parent. The courts generally favor stability, Tom warned. Marcus has had primary custody for 5 years, and Sophie appears to be thriving academically and socially. Judges don't like to disrupt arrangements that are working unless there's clear evidence of harm. Then we'll document evidence of potential harm, Linda said with the confidence of someone who understood how to use the legal system to achieve personal objectives. Private investigators, expert witnesses, psychological evaluations that demonstrate the inappropriate nature of this relationship. Over the next 2 weeks, Linda assembled a legal team and investigative resources that money could buy when someone was determined to build a case. The private investigators documented every interaction between Marcus and Victoria, photographed their meetings, researched their financial transactions, and interviewed former employees, neighbors, and community members who might provide testimony about the relationship's impact on Sophie's development. The investigation revealed exactly what Linda had hoped to find evidence of Marcus accepting financial assistance from Victoria. Documentation of Sophie's exposure to luxury and lifestyle disparities that were far beyond her normal experience, and expert opinions about the psychological risks of such arrangements for children from working-class backgrounds. The key is timing. Linda's lead attorney explained during a strategy session at Tom's Beverly Hills law firm. We need to file the custody modification petition while the media attention is still fresh. While we can argue that Marcus is being distracted by celebrity and social opportunities rather than focusing on Sophie's needs, Linda nodded, feeling the familiar satisfaction that came with taking control of situations that threatened her vision of how life should be organized. She'd built her new marriage around principles of stability and predictability, and Marcus's involvement with Victoria Sterling represented the kind of chaos and uncertainty that she'd worked hard to eliminate from her life. The custody petition was filed in Riverside County Family Court on a Tuesday morning in mid-December, accompanied by a comprehensive brief that painted Marcus Thompson as a father whose judgment had been compromised by social opportunities and financial incentives beyond his normal experience. The document cited the disparity between his modest circumstances and Victoria Sterling's wealth as evidence that their relationship was inherently inappropriate and potentially exploitative. The legal papers were served to Marcus at Patterson Industries on a Wednesday afternoon, delivered by a process server who found him at his welding station working on a custom fabrication project. Pete Patterson watched with concern as Marcus read through the documents, his expression shifting from confusion to anger to something that looked like resignation. Bad news, Pete asked when the process server had left. My ex-wife wants to modify our custody agreement, Marcus said, setting down the papers and removing his safety glasses. She thinks my friendship with Victoria Sterling demonstrates that I'm not fit to be Sophie's primary guardian. That's ridiculous, Pete said immediately. Sophie's thriving. You're doing great work here, and your personal relationships are nobody's business but your own. Marcus appreciated Pete's support, but he understood the legal challenges he was facing better than his employer realized. Linda had always been strategic about using the legal system to get what she wanted, and she had resources now that she hadn't possessed during their original divorce proceedings. Tom Morrison's law firm specialized in high-stakes family law cases, and they would approach the custody modification with the kind of professional competence that Marcus couldn't afford to match. I need to call Victoria, Marcus said, realizing that the custody petition would inevitably drag her into legal proceedings that could expose her family to unwanted scrutiny and public attention. She needs to know what's coming. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with Sophie working on homework while he read through the custody petition one more time, trying to understand all the legal arguments that Linda's attorneys had constructed around his friendship with Victoria. The document was thorough and devastating, painting their relationship as evidence of poor judgment and inappropriate social ambition. Dad, what's wrong? Sophie asked, looking up from her algebra homework with the perceptive attention that had always made her seem older than her years. You've been staring at those papers for an hour. Marcus considered how to explain the situation without frightening Sophie or making her feel responsible for the adult complications that were threatening to disrupt their lives. Your mother wants to change our custody arrangement, he said carefully. She thinks it might be better if you live with her and Tom full-time in California. Sophie's face went pale as she processed this information. Because of Victoria, because we're friends with her and Alexander and Isabella. Partly, Marcus admitted, seeing no point in lying about something Sophie would inevitably learn about during the legal proceedings. Your mother thinks our friendship with Victoria's family might not be good for you? That's stupid, Sophie said with 12-year-old directness. Victoria's nice, and Alexander and Isabella are my friends. Why would Mom care about that when she barely even knows me anymore? Marcus wished he could provide a simple answer that would make sense to Sophie, but Linda's motivations were complicated by years of resentment, financial insecurity, and the kind of psychological distance that made it easy to make decisions about other people's lives without considering their actual preferences or needs. Sometimes adults disagree about what's best for children, he said finally. Your mother loves you and wants what she thinks will make you happy and safe. But I am happy and safe, Sophie said, her voice carrying the first hint of fear Marcus had heard since the custody papers arrived. I don't want to live in California. I want to stay here with you and go to school with my friends and keep working on science projects and seeing Victoria and the twins. I know, kiddo, and I'm going to fight to make sure that happens. But it might get complicated for a while, and people might ask you questions about our friendship with Victoria's family. Sophie nodded with the solemn understanding of a child who had learned that adult problems often affected her life in ways she couldn't control. Are you going to tell Victoria? Yes, I have to. She needs to know that she might get dragged into legal proceedings because of our friendship. She won't mind, Sophie said with the confidence of someone who had come to trust Victoria's commitment to their relationship. She's our friend. Friends help each other when things get difficult. Marcus hoped Sophie was right, but he also understood that custody battles had a way of testing relationships in ways that ordinary friendship couldn't prepare for. Victoria Sterling might be willing to support him in principle, but having her family's privacy invaded by legal proceedings was a different kind of challenge entirely. As he helped Sophie finish her homework and prepared for the conversation with Victoria that would determine whether their friendship could survive the complications that Linda Morrison had introduced into their lives, Marcus reflected on the irony of the situation. He'd spent 5 years building a stable, loving home for Sophie, only to have that stability threatened by his association with someone whose wealth and status made them vulnerable to accusations of inappropriate social climbing. The custody battle ahead would test everything he'd built since getting sober, his relationship with Sophie, his friendship with Victoria, his standing in the Riverside Falls community that had embraced them both. But as he looked at his daughter working diligently on her algebra problems, trusting him to protect the life they'd built together, Marcus knew he would fight with everything he had to preserve the family they'd become. The real question was whether Victoria Sterling would be willing to fight alongside him, or whether the legal complications would prove too costly for a billionaire whose own children's privacy and security might be compromised by association with a custody battle that had nothing to do with them. The Riverside County Family Courthouse was a modern building designed to handle the complex emotional terrain of custody disputes with architectural dignity and procedural efficiency. Victoria Sterling arrived at 8:30 a.m. on the morning of Marcus Thompson's custody hearing, accompanied by the kind of legal team that unlimited resources could assemble when someone's freedom and family were at stake. Mrs. Sterling, we need to review strategy one final time, said David Chen, her lead attorney and no relation to her assistant. Ms. Morrison's legal team is going to portray your friendship with Mr. Thompson as evidence of his poor judgment and inappropriate social ambition. They'll question your motivations, suggest manipulation, and argue that Sophie is being exposed to situations beyond her emotional maturity. Victoria nodded, understanding the legal challenges while feeling frustrated by the way genuine friendship was being weaponized for custody proceedings. She'd spent the past month learning about family law, expert witnesses, and the complex factors that judges considered when determining a child's best interests. Marcus arrived with his court-appointed attorney, Sarah Rodriguez, a young woman who specialized in custody cases for families who couldn't afford private representation. He wore his best suit, the same one from Sophie's birthday party, and his expression showed the kind of determined concentration Victoria had learned to associate with him facing difficult challenges. Mrs. Sterling, Sarah approached their group in the courthouse lobby. Thank you for being here. I know this puts you in a difficult position. There's no difficult position when it comes to supporting friends, Victoria replied firmly. Marcus is one of the best fathers I've ever known, and Sophie belongs with him. The hearing began at 9:00 a.m. in Judge Patricia Hamilton's courtroom, a space designed to balance formality with accessibility for families navigating the most important decisions of their lives. Judge Hamilton had a reputation for focusing on children's welfare rather than legal technicalities. Linda Morrison arrived precisely on time, accompanied by her husband Tom and a legal team that included 2 attorneys and a child psychologist. Linda looked confident and composed, dressed in clothes that suggested financial success without ostentation. Ms. Morrison, you're seeking to modify the existing custody arrangement, Judge Hamilton announced. Please explain your concerns. Linda's lead attorney, Patricia Whitmore, stood to present their argument with polished competence. 2 years later, Marcus Thompson stands in the Riverside Falls Community Science Center, watching his daughter Sophie explain renewable energy to a room full of kids who believe they can change the world. Victoria Sterling is there too, not as the billionaire CEO who once deceived him, but as the woman who learned that the most valuable investments can't be measured in dollars. The custody battle that nearly tore them apart became the foundation that made them stronger. The lies that should have destroyed their friendship instead taught them the difference between what we own and what we earn, between the life we're given and the family we choose. Marcus saved 2 children from drowning that November day, but in the end, they all saved each other from something far more dangerous: lives half-lived, walls built too high, and the quiet desperation that comes from believing we have to face the world alone. The Science Center will serve thousands of kids over the years, but the real legacy isn't in the building. It's in the proof that connection matters more than circumstance, that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most ordinary heroes create the most extraordinary change. What would you risk to save a stranger's child, and what would it cost to discover that stranger could save you right back?